Vermont.
So, it's July 8th, 2003, 1 p.m. We're at the home of Trudy and Herbert Wolf in Waitsfield, Vermont. And I'm interviewing two people today. Maybe you could start. You go by Jen, but your name is Genevieve, you said?
Both.
Okay.
Go by both
So,
interchangeably.
say your name and where you were born, if you could.
Sure. Genevieve Uris, Warren, Vermont.
All right. And you were saying before the tape was on that your dad is Jewish, but your mother isn't. Is that right?
Yeah.
Where did he come from?
He's from New York City, in Queens. And they moved here before I was born.
They met in New York City?
Yeah.
Okay. And why did they come here?
He is an attorney, and I think it was a lifestyle choice. And he was the town attorney here for a number of years, and then returned back about 15 years after he moved here.
When you say a lifestyle choice, what maybe you could flesh that out?
Well, this is from what I've gathered. It was not my choice. I think it was probably 69, 70 that he moved up and wanted to get out of the city, making choices for sort of where he'd rather be, what he'd rather be doing, Vermont, skiing, golfing. He could golf in New York, though. There's plenty of golfing. And I guess he was just caught up in, he said, the tuning in and dropping out, and so he moved here.
Did he have some connection to this area at all?
I think he'd been here. He'd been here skiing, but I don't know. Oh, he did. He had a friend that he was a lifeguard with that lived here. John Woodruff, and so.
And maybe you could talk a little bit about, as you can, about his background, his family background. I mean, do you know your grandparents and so on?
Certainly. My grandfather, Herbert Uris, was born in Russia and came over when the Cossacks burned his village when he was a newborn. He was the youngest of 9. And they lived on the Lower East Side. And I believe the father left when they moved to the States, and so he wasn't really rolling his family. And he became a dentist and moved to Queens, where he married my grandmother, Hortense, who was from Newark. And her mother came over. She was from Germany. Probably, I don't know, turn of the century.
Mm-hmm. I feel so disrespectful of your mother since I'm not asking about her family background, but I guess you understand. In your dad's family, by the time he was growing up, were his parents observant Jews? Did they raise him with a Jewish background?
Yes, he was bar mitzvahed, but they were fairly reformed and had practiced, but were not terribly religious.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that there was, even in his community, maybe only one other Jewish boy in his class, and they had a Christmas tree.
Even in Queens, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, where they lived in Queens. Huh. Okay, well, we'll get back.
Okay.
Now it's going to be Trudy's turn. So you heard some of the questions I was asking Jan about family background, where you grew up, that kind of thing.
My father came from Russia, and my mother came from New York City. And my father came over by himself on the Bremen when he was 12 years old and paved the way for the rest of the family at 12. And he told us quite a lot of the things that happened on the Bremen. And a lot of the things that you read are really not true. They said they had kosher kitchens and all that. He said he doesn't remember that. But he settled on the east side. And once he was here, he paved the way for his mom and father and 3 brothers and 2 sisters to come over. And he was in business by himself when he was about in his 20s. He went as far as the 6th grade in elementary school, and then he worked. And he met my mother, and my mother gave him $10,000 to go into business. And he went into the dress business and was quite successful. And he did well in America. He spoke English beautifully. You would never know he was from a European nation. And he went into the army. He was in the First World War. And there he met his best friend. And he ended up being a colonel in the army, his friend. And my father and he continued friendship after the army ended, but his friend stayed in. And he learned a lot about America from him because he was a Cornell graduate. So that paved the way for my father and his life.
So that after the war, he ended up going to school or something like that?
Never. My father went as far as 6th grade, and that was it.
Huh.
But he could tell you more about history and the opera and politics than I could even think of, because he was very well read. Mm. And that was very important to him. Education was important, but was not able to afford it.
You mentioned that he told you all kinds of things about the ship. It didn't have a kosher kitchen, but what were some of the things that it did? Like, what did he
all
tell
he
you about?
remembered was throwing up over the deck. It was so awful. It was the most awful thing. They were just huddled in like close together. Of course, everything was close together. Lots of disease and sickness and everything.
Why did, in his particular case, I mean, Jen mentioned the Cossacks burning the village. Was there a particular reason why he came? Yes,
because, a lot was taken over by the Tsar. And my father's father was a tailor for the Tsar. And that enabled him to go to military school in Russia. And I did have pictures of him in a military uniform. So they were kind of well respected because of that, but there was such anti-Semitism, it was just awful. So that's why they came over. Mm-hmm. Probably for the same reason as everybody else did.
Yeah, I just read this novel by Bernard Malamud, The Fixer. Did you ever?
No, I didn't read it.
I feel like I've heard.
Well, I didn't really know what I was getting into, but it's a fictional account of a Jewish guy in Tsarist Russia who all of a sudden is accused of one of these trumped up charges of murdering a Christian child and then draining the blood. Ritual. This was what was believed about Jews, that they did this ritual sacrifice of Christian children. But it really gives a vivid portrayal of those sort of anti-Semitic conditions that were there. And this guy too was in the Russian army just before this stuff happened. You mentioned your mother
was born in New York City.
Okay, and
she did not come from a religious family.
Where did her parents come from?
New York.
So they'd been there a long time.
Yes.
Do you know what their background was?
German.
German Jewish.
German Jewish, yes. And I think they were from Alsace-Lorraine. At that time, the borders were changing. Yeah. But my mother really wasn't brought up with any religion.
So
she was Jewish, but they didn't really practice.
Her family went back quite a while in New York. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Now, what about you in your growing up? Did you
I went to Sunday school.
Okay.
And it was reformed, and I was confirmed. And that was at 16 years old. Mm-hmm. So we always went to Reformed Temple. And we didn't light candles. We didn't really do very much at home as far as practices. We weren't kosher or anything.
Where you lived in Brooklyn, was that a fairly mixed neighborhood?
Mixed. A mixed neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Yes. And I didn't know anybody that was religious. Much different than Brooklyn is now. Mm-hmm. I never even heard of Hasidic Jews or anything like that. I think most of the very religious people lived in Borough Park. That's where Larry King came from, and a lot. And what's that professor? The Harvard professor?
Oh, Dershowitz.
Dershowitz, yeah. Mm-hmm. But we came from a very mixed neighborhood.
Now, in your growing up, Jen, here in which town?
In Warren,
In
which
Warren.
is only about a mile
Just
from here.
Just
Yeah.
south of here. Okay. Did your parents sort of tell you at a young age, oh, you have this Jewish background? I mean, was that a relevant thing for you growing up?
It was not terribly relevant, and I don't know that it was ever anything that was discussed. It was just something you grew up with. This is what and nobody practiced. My mother didn't go to church. My father didn't go to temple. So, but we always, just minor things, we always had Passover, which I knew that none of my friends did.
He came to Trudy's.
We came to Trudy's for Passover. Sometimes we'd go a few other places, but and that was maybe the only real sort of typical Jewish experience I would have had. I knew that my grandparents were Jewish. I went to visit them a lot, but my father's brother also, his wife was Christian, so it wasn't a lot of... we didn't do anything that was terribly different from what anyone else did. I think because my mother was the one who really does the holidays, so we mostly had Christmas and Christmas presents. We did have a menorah that we lit maybe 50% of the nights. And we didn't do anything really special for that. I did, in school, there was one other boy in my class whose mother was Jewish. And every year we'd write a report on Hanukkah.
Who was that?
Jesse Murphy.
Oh.
Barbara.
Oh, really?
And we never knew anything. Every year we'd have to go look it up again. And that was really about the extent of it in terms of being a student.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the Hanukkah report thing. My kids go to a school where I think there might be one or two other kids of Jewish background in their school of 100. It's also a very small town in Massachusetts. And that's sort of the thing, when it's Hanukkah, then it's sort of their turn to do the show and tell a little bit. Did you ever find, like in a history class or anything like that in school, did you ever find yourself sort of explaining things to people?
Not ever. I didn't know enough to explain anything. And by the time I got older, where history was a little more in depth, we had moved to New York. And in which case, I actually found that I learned a lot at that time just from my friends and peers. So I learned probably more through them than I did through my own family.
All right.
But after that, I was going to say, as a teacher, I find that I explain a lot to my students.
Tell about that.
The area that I teach in is a union school. Takes from about 6 towns. So all the way from Cambridge, which is a suburb of Burlington, to Eden and Belvedere, which are, I guess, the primary industry is probably logging, very small towns. And in certain books that we read night. So in that, I've taught a lot. And even things that obviously I've had to look up, I don't know. And my kids ask me a lot, where they'll say, you know a lot about this. How do you know all of this? Well, I'm Jewish. And I feel like I have to take the role of actually, rather than saying that that my father's Jewish, of just saying, well, I'm Jewish, because it's the closest that they may come for a long time. And in other books, we Bless the Beast and Children. There's one Jewish kid who, very minor, they just sort of talked about that he was bar mitzvahed in the Torah, and so we use, those are vocabulary words, they learn them. But then there are some odd, more sort of, I don't know if it's anti-Semitic as much as just ignorant things that happen, where I'll have kids refer to phrases like, someone drew you down, so you can't say that. And they don't think it's even occurred to them, and they think about it, and the other kid next to them says, yeah, that's really not okay, you can't say that. And they think about it, and say, oh, it never even occurred to me. So, there definitely are a few instances like that.
it took me a long time to figure out that the same phrase, somebody gypped you. I don't think I was. I think I was well into adulthood before I put two and two together and realized, wait a minute, that's not a nice thing to say. But growing up, you just, people don't make those connections. So Trudy, you grew up in Brooklyn, and then you said you ended up living in New Rochelle for
20 years.
Yeah.
And we had this as our vacation home.
Uh-huh.
And
so
when
you've been coming here since?
Yes.
Yeah.
30 years, actually. Yeah. But, I mean, this is an easy community to live in because people come from all over, and there's nothing really that I found here that's racial at all. Nothing.
No, now...
The only thing I did, I have heard things, by the way. I did hear that some kids called other children kikes on the school bus. That I did hear a few times, which I was shocked. Because you never heard that in New York, ever.
Now, in my experience in living in rural New England, people may not have, there may not be so much any kind of racial or anti-Semitic current, but there along has been a distinction between summer people and people who are year-round. Or, you know what I mean? People who are seasonal and people who are year-round. Now, you're here year-round now, but when you and your husband first started coming here, did you feel like you were only sort of partially a resident of the area?
No.
Although, I think at some level there's a distinction of even people. There's a lot of people my age whose families moved here, like your children, who grew up here, but are not really considered Vermonters, even if you were born here. It's a different distinction.
Definitely.
Especially being from New York or Boston or any of those sorts of areas.
Don't forget, this is a resort area. So lots of people do come here to retire or have a change of life.
Now, you got to be a Vermonter because your dad because you grew up here, or was there still some awareness that, well, her dad only came here?
Well, I think when I was a kid, there were, I would say, almost 50-50 of people from Europe, people from cities, people from different areas that came to the ski area, and kids whose families had been here for generations. And it was a fairly obvious distinction in many ways. Economics, culture, yeah. I'd say it was fairly clear. And even a lot of the people that I'm still friends with or see now are from people that moved here. They were not generations of people from this area.
When you started coming here, you said because you were in the habit of skiing here?
Yes, and most of our friends were people that we skied with, that vacationed here.
Yeah. How long did it take for you to realize, gee, this would be a nice place not just to ski at, but to be at other times?
I really never thought of it. It wasn't, it wasn't because we wanted to establish a business here, It was really because my husband sold his business. That's the only reason we came to live here. It wasn't something that we decided originally.
Yeah. And you already had the house.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that made an easy transition.
Yeah.
And meeting people here is very easy. There's no problem. People are friendly.
Back to Jen. Now, can you just describe a little bit, where you grew up? Did you grow up in a house outside of town? Did you grow up in town? Did you have land around where you...
Yeah, I grew up, I'm an only child, we started off as a small, old, converted farmhouse that my family had renovated. We had about 6 acres, and probably about 20 protected acres, up about less than a mile from Sugar Bush, maybe only a quarter mile, but that puts you a few miles from town.
And your dad used to come home from work throw his jacket or whatever over his shoulder and say, "This is my land." I remember him saying that.
Did you take advantage of living out?
Oh yeah,
all this
yeah,
open
we
space?
did
You
a
spent
lot.
a lot of time outdoors.
We definitely skied a lot. My father and mother golfed a lot. We hiked. I know my father talks of the few times that he went with some friends. He had been in the army, so he knew how to shoot a gun. So we would go hunting, and he went to hunting camp. And I think those were his few times of feeling really accepted into the Vermont community, as doing something that was really more of a local tradition and something that he could have done on vacation in other places.
What did he go deer hunting? Or?
Deer hunting and bird hunting.
Uh-huh.
I don't think he had much success bird hunting, but it was just being outside, walking around with his fellow people in town and his gun, and felt like he was really a part of this.
Now, is that still a fairly common thing? I mean, I know also where I live in Western Mass, I mean, whenever it is like the first or second week of December, I mean, kids don't go to school.
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
And I get, when we do personal stories, personal narratives, I get a lot of stories from my students about my first deer, my first hunting, my first youth day hunt. I caught a deer, or shot a deer. So that's really powerful for those kids as a coming of age.
Well, now I guess I want to hear about, from both of you, about your, I guess, sort of current day Jewish involvement. I mean, apparently there's a group, or you go to a temple.
We have a temple that we go to in Burlington, but we really only go during the high holidays. It's a Reformed temple.
Which one is it?
Sinai.
And did you start going there, I mean, pretty shortly after you moved up here, or did it take a while?
We tried a few others. We tried a few others, and then we ended up joining there.
But in other words, it wasn't something, it's not like you were living here a while and then thought, oh, we should find a temple. I mean, that was sort of,
oh, no,
you started looking right away.
We always go to temple during high holidays.
Yeah.
And this was a new temple.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Who's the rabbi there?
Rabbi Glacier, and he's from Newton, Mass.
I'm trying to figure out, because there were so many people from Vermont at this conference I was at last weekend.
Yeah.
I don't think I've met him.
No?
I'm not sure he was there or not. But, I was telling Trudy last weekend, my family and I went to a conference called the Conference on Judaism in Rural New England. And it seemed like just about every rabbi in New England was there, among other people. So, and how about you? How did you come to? I mean, did you have any formal Jewish education growing up or anything like that?
Nor Christian. So I really had no religious education growing up, and I've not really taken much on in that way either. So I'd say really, at this point, we've actually gotten much closer with some of my father's cousins who live in upstate New York, Saranac Lake and New Paltz, and there. So just by sort of going to more ceremonies, weddings, bar mitzvahs. We just went to my cousin's wedding last month, and she's in Montreal, and she's trained to be a rabbi. Her husband is a rabbi, and they're conservative or Orthodox. I think it was a new experience for me and my mother, and probably my father.
Probably.
Yeah. So it was a whole ceremony with no mixed dancing and
men and women on opposite sides.
Yes, there was no partition, but it was obviously separated.
And do you ever go to the temple that Trudy was mentioning in Burlington?
I think we're the only people in this whole community that belong to a temple. Even the Jewish people that moved up here from Jersey or Massachusetts, not one of them belongs to a temple. Not one.
I did have a funny thing, and it just happened this weekend, so it was on my mind. A friend of mine who grew up in Waitsfield, he's my age, and his girlfriend lives in Connecticut, so he's been living down there with her. He just went to his first bar mitzvah, and he said, have any of you been to one of these things? I opened up the book, and it was backwards. And yeah, I think he was also just surprised at the lavishness of a bar mitzvah, how it wasn't just sort of a party for a 13-year-old that he was expecting. He said, and they had salmon and great food, but I didn't put on the hat.
Now you said something about just a group, a Jewish group or something,
yes,
like that, which is like the potluck dinner.
This
thing.
fellow.
How did that come about?
This fellow Eric came to town, and he's a professor. He's a drama professor, and I don't know how it came about. He decided to form a group of Jewish people. So we go once a month on Friday night, and everybody brings food, and we have fun. I mean, nothing really goes on. Just social.
Mm-hmm.
Why did he form it? I have no idea. Maybe he wanted a feeling of belonging. Probably that's it.
But aside from the, you said there's he'll say a little prayer at the beginning.
Yes, he
aside
lights the candles and says a prayer. And every month it's at somebody else's house, and everybody else brings food.
Hello,
Jenny.
This is my husband, Herb.
Hi.
You married yet?
No, sorry.
Gonna wait for me?
This is Michael.
Hi, Michael Hoberman. Good to
Hi,
meet you.
Michael. Herb Wolf. How's everything?
Things are going well. Building, they just renovated the whole thing and built another section, so I think they're in that mode for a few years, where they're used to.
Well, I think we
a lot
have more professional people living here.
Absolutely. More
probably
educated
the-
people.
So
There
when
is a thing, I don't know if it has anything to do with this, but there is an online Vermont rural network where you can see different towns and levels of education and all of that.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think there's a town outside Amherst called Leverett where years ago, I don't know how things are now, but there was some wrangling over the school budget, and a lot of the old timers were against raising the budget, didn't want their taxes to go up. More recent arrivals did want it to, but they wanted to expand, literally, physically expand the school. And I think at that exact moment, that's when a certain element of anti-Semitism reared its head. Because the accusation was that, well, it's these Jewish people that want to raise the taxes and, make the schools.
Huh.
We've gotten along. We grew up in one-room schoolhouses. We don't need, so.
Different culture.
There are, people our age who I think have moved because they don't want to pay the taxes. This town seems to always, 3 towns seem to always vote for raising taxes for the schools. But there are people who they wouldn't vote for it. I mean, I'm sure they voted for it when their children were in school, but now that they're retired, they don't want to pay the taxes.
Yeah. Trying to remember, what were we? We were talking about the group.
Oh, the Jewish group.
Yeah, the Jewish group. Is that something that you've gone to also?
No.
Well, you can come.
Thank you.
Get great food.
What kind of food do you get?
Everything. I mean, people just bring whatever they make, Pasta, salads, desserts, hors d'oeuvres. I think people just come for the food. I really do.
How many people about?
How many are there?
Well,
Probably about
I know at Mitchell's house we had
probably 35, 40.
Yeah. The last time it was a off week or something. People weren't up here. And at Eric's house, it wasn't very crowded.
I think they just do it to be among some Jewish people and have food. It's not really religious.
Yeah.
But Eric is very informative.
Yeah.
He knows
We usually
everything.
have it on a Friday evening. So, he lights the candles and says the prayer with bread and wine. And and then we start eating.
It's very nice.
And talking.
It's a community function.
Yeah.
And he's really into it. He knows everything. Oh, we have a Passover once a year.
Oh, within
That I
that.
haven't been
as part of
invited
that
to.
group?
It's in the newspaper.
Oh.
It's in the newspaper. We have a lot of people that are not Jewish. And we always have it. And every year it's wonderful. And we have about 75 people that come.
Is that at a different person's house? Or
No,
you guys
we have it at
a hall for that.
a restaurant.
This year
Usually
we
at a
had
restaurant.
it at the Sugar Bush Inn. We've had it at the church. We've had it at
I don't know why you don't
a lot of
come.
places.
I'll come.
You should come. This year, this fellow Adam Gresham joined the corporation up here at Sugarbush, and he came from Weston, Mass. And he really wanted his children to meet other people that were Jewish and whatever. He's not married to a Jewish girl. So he kind of got involved with this group. He thought his children would meet other Jewish children, you know. So he was the one that was instrumental of we had it at the Sugar Bush, and it was fabulous. Fabulous. But every year we get about 75 people that want to come.
Is that run by just the people who attend, or I mean, you don't have a rabbi come in?
No.
Yeah, it's just
No.
the people run it themselves.
He runs the
Right.
service.
Yeah.
He does. He knows everything.
Yeah, we have a similar thing where I live. You know, just
It's very
loose
nice.
conglomeration.
You'll come next year.
In Western Mass.
You
Yeah.
see it in the
Very nice.
newspaper?
I think I did.
We always have it in the
Now,
newspaper.
what do you do?
I'm a college professor. I teach
Oh.
English
Where?
at Fitchburg State College.
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
What do you teach?
You want some iced tea?
I teach American literature primarily, and you may not have thoughts about, but I know that you would, because you said that you visited Israel twice, and I just want to hear about that a little bit. Why did you go?
Well, the first time...
Why did you like it?
I love Israel. The first time we went, I met a teacher that I was teaching with at school in New Rochelle, and I saw her in the supermarket, and she said, "What are you and Herb doing over Easter?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know. We really didn't plan anything." She said, "Well, I'm going to Israel with the family," and her son was in my daughter's grade at school. I said, "That sounds great. I'm going to have to tell Herbert about it." So Herbert came home from work, and I told him about it. He said, "Are you crazy? Do you think I'm going to go to Israel for a week? Are you crazy?" Well, P.S., we were really into it, and we went. And we had a wonderful time. We went with our children, and I have 3 children, and they had a fabulous time. I mean, I love the country itself, mainly. Not particularly the people.
The countryside, the geography.
Yeah, the geography. I mean, the people, actually were not my cup of tea, but we had a marvelous group, and we just had a great time. And then the second time we went with our rabbi from Burlington, Rabbi Glazier, and it was lovely because there were only 12 of us, and the cantor was there, and his wife, and we had a very, very lovely time. And it was only 12 people, so we just had a van. But the country itself fascinates me. I love the picturesque country. It's just beautiful. Same reason why I love Vermont.
You said the people, on the other hand, were...
Well, I don't think that you can really, align yourself with them. Their objectives and their way of life and everything is so different than ours. So I don't think they accept you as a Jew, per se. They set themselves aside from us. That's my feeling.
Uh-huh.
Did you feel that way, Herbert?
Yeah, sort of.
There's nobody that you could really sit and relate to. Even the waiters and the, in the restaurants, I didn't find them very obliging.
They're not noted. I mean, I don't know. I grew up around Israeli people because my mother. They're not noted for being polite.
No, they're not. They're not.
The driving habits.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
think they have one of the highest in incident, and they must have one of the highest incidents of automobile fatality, because I just remember being terrified.
That's what I heard, because I never
Scary.
thought people drive. I thought Boston was bad. First time I went to Boston, I couldn't take it. Now I've gotten used to it. I think it's better now. But I remember our oldest daughter was going to school there, and I remember driving, and I didn't know how to get someplace, so she said she'll drive. And she started driving, and she's cutting people off, and people are cutting her off. I said, will you pull over? I can't stand the way you're driving. She said, but Dad, if you don't get in there, they're not going to let you in. You'll never get any place if you don't cut your way in. And I found that I think it's better now. I don't find that now when I'm driving in Boston. But I did then. But I don't know. I guess they have a feeling that, they've accomplished a lot, and maybe they have that feeling about themselves that they have a right to act that way. I'm not a psychologist, I'm a psychiatrist.
Have you ever had a hankering to, or maybe you have been, I don't know.
No, I haven't been. I think it would be interesting to go. But I wouldn't have any tremendous interest in going until I see what happens in terms of just
Peace.
Yes.
Which will probably never be.
Or at least maybe something a little bit relative to peace.
Calmer.
Yeah.
When we went there, we walked in Jerusalem from our hotel to that area where they had that awful massacre.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so fabulous. We walked there at night. I had my pocketbook on my shoulder. It was so much more peaceful than walking in New York or Boston.
What year was this?
5 years ago?
About that, 5-6 years.
Yeah, so that was when things were a lot better for a little while.
It was a lot better, except there was a killing on...
before we got there, because they had a little... in Jerusalem, they had a little sign on a post outside a restaurant.
No,
that
was in Tel Aviv. On that main street in Tel Aviv.
No,
where somebody was murdered. But anyway, it was calm. And we walked at night, and it was like a 20-minute, half-hour walk. And we walked around this little place where there were all restaurants and all young people. It's a great place for young people. It is.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I was a young person, I could see myself going, not now during all this going on, but I could see myself going there. I could see myself. But it was so calm and peaceful. We went back and we went through Jerusalem, and we never had a problem. But of course things have gone downhill.
Mm-hmm.
You talk to other people who go there, and they say, you just don't take buses. You want to go someplace, you take a cab or you walk.
Yeah. But then, these things happen in restaurants too.
Yeah.
Anyway.
It's very sad. Very sad. Well, we'll see what happens.
It's better now than 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I think you're right. But I think it's a great place for young people. I could really see myself as young people wanting to be part of that whole scene. I think it's nice.
One last thing, actually, Jen, I wanted to ask. Something that Trudy had said before about she remembered your dad coming home from work and saying, "This is my land." Do you remember the same thing?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, he stood right in the driveway, right before your garage, threw his jacket over, he said, "This is all my land."
I know that he loved living there, very much so. He thought he was very excited about it.
Well, if he hadn't had that, New York City experience with the law, he probably would have stayed here.
Yeah, I was always surprised they didn't come back.
I am too.
Yeah, I certainly expected them to come back. Well, I think your father would come back in a minute. I don't.
Well, maybe not anymore because my mother's here most of the
Oh,
time
she
in the
is?
summer. She's here most of
You
the
know,
summer.
I don't think
I
I've
never
bumped
see her.
into her, and I don't.
You know,
Never
she's
see her.
she just gardens. She's at the place in Waitsfield. And she just sort of gardens and does her thing there. And he's at the beach.
Yeah.
And so,
He's a lifeguard.
at Jones Beach.
Wait, who's the
My
lifeguard?
father.
Her father.
Okay, that's what I was.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
That's
He's
his
very
profession.
proud that he can pass the test.
Yes.
You know, he's not a chicken
Great.
anymore.
I mean, it's great that he does that. It's great.
No, and I know that I think sometimes he comes up and he feels like because he hasn't lived here in so long, he doesn't have as many connections and as many things to do.
Yeah, there aren't that many.
Yeah. So.
That's why we play golf in Burlington now. Why?
Her
We
father
do.
was our lawyer when we closed on
We,
his house.
you know,
But it's a mix, it's a
yeah, there aren't that
mixed
many.
thing. If
for
he
us
were
to
up
play
more, he'd have more, he'd gain new contacts or reconnect with
I
other
don't know
ones.
about
He
that.
might reconnect with some people, but...
Because Tom Colby plays in Waterbury now.
Okay.
Did he ever
Your
play
father
with
know
Stu
that,
Libby?
Yeah, I think so.
Does your dad know that John Hutton is retiring?
Yes, we
Oh,
were
he does
told
know.
John Hutton was retiring, yes.
That was funny
John Hutton was her father's partner.
at one time.
So he, I missed something here. He doesn't live in Vermont.
No, my
Anymore.
father lives in... My parents live in New York.
I
now.
see. How long ago did they?
Probably about 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And they come... Originally, their plan was to go for about 3 years and then return. And it just never materialized.
But you're here to stay. I
But
guess.
I'm here, yep. I came back about 5 years ago.
All right.
But that was a good experience in New York, going to school.
Yeah, I think all in all...
You
it
wouldn't have liked
broadens your
Harwood.
horizons and...
Harwood isn't the greatest school. You
No,
went to a
I'd
very
like to
good
think
high
it's getting
school.
better, but...
I hope so. I hope so.
Where did you go to school in New York?
in Queens, at Cardozo High School in Bayside.
Uh-huh.
See, that's a very good school.
And it was... They had some magnet programs. And some other
Did you
programs.
come back up here to go to college
No, I
here?
went to
or-
college in Colorado,
Uh-huh.
in Boulder.
Yeah.
Where'd you go to that?
In Boulder, University of Colorado.
University
Oh,
of
yes.
Colorado.
I couldn't remember where you went. That's right.
I went to University of Vermont,
Oh,
and my 3 children did.
I should have asked about.
Yeah,
That.
that's where I went to college.
So you
From Brooklyn.
Wow.
Wow.
All right, so you got to tell me about that.
That was
Why
wonderful.
there? Why did you go there?
Why did I go there? Well, when I graduated from high school, the veterans were all getting out of service. So there were very few out-of-state colleges you could go to because of that. And I found out you could go to University of Vermont. They would accept you as an out-of-stater. But the other schools didn't. The other state schools didn't. Michigan didn't. Wisconsin didn't. So that's why I went to University of Vermont, and I loved it. I loved it. I had a lot of friends, Jewish and non-Jewish. No, I never belonged to Hillel or anything like that.
But they even had that.
They had
Yeah.
Hillel,
Huh.
yeah. There was. It seems to me that the group from Burlington, Vermont, were the ones that were in Hillel, because they searched to meet other Jewish students, whereas we didn't have that need coming from out of town. And I lived in the dormitories and everything. And I'm very active at University of Vermont. And I just had my 50th reunion, and we had a really wonderful group that came back, and I had great friends from Vermont.
Did when you were in school, did your parents come and visit you?
Once.
What
Graduation.
Was that like? What was that like for them? I mean, I'm just,
Just for graduation.
Uh-huh.
That's all. They never came up. They never came. It wasn't like nowadays where kids' parents bring them to college. And I was just reading Hillary Clinton's story about bringing their daughter up to Stanford and the whole thing. Parents did not do that. I went on the train. and I had a steamer trunk, which I took with me on the train. And I got off in Burlington at the station there and got a cab to take me to my dorm. And my parents didn't come up until I graduated.
Don't forget, it's different generations. Most of our parents, if they went to school, maybe they finished elementary school. Mm-hmm. If they did.
Yeah.
My mother did. My mother went to high school, but my father didn't. And I'm thinking Trudy's father.
But they weren't as protective, and they didn't.
Yeah. Well,
I told my mother and father, I got into University of Vermont. They didn't even know where I applied. They had no idea. Do you think they went to visit colleges with me? I mean, different.
Yeah. Well, they knew you were pursuing your education. They were probably delighted by that, and that was sufficient. Yeah, I don't know, but I'm just...
4 of us came from Midwood High School up to University of Vermont. 4 in my class. And I don't remember anybody's parents ever visiting them. It was different.
Now, it makes me think my father went to Dartmouth in the 50s and hated it. And does speak of being one of, maybe one other Jewish student in the quota sort of system, and just felt completely excluded. Very unhappy there. And his family wouldn't let him leave because it was a good school.
Mm. Yeah, I've heard, Dartmouth in particular, I think, that, they're still crawling out of that phase now, probably. Yeah.
But you did not have that at University of Vermont. Not at all. There were, in my class, there were 20 Jewish girls and 40 Jewish boys. And I don't think we ever experienced anti-Semitism in any way. Ever.
Yeah.
The only thing was you couldn't get into a fraternity or sorority unless you were of that religion. That was the only reason.
Yeah.
But they were segregated. Much more so than nowadays. I don't think they have Jewish fraternities anymore. No. I don't think so.
They must.
I think they do.
At University of Vermont, they don't.
Well, I don't know about University
of
Vermont.
They did in Boulder. Yeah.
Yeah, but not in Vermont. TEP and FISIC,
but they have the same sort of overriding beliefs, or I don't know if it's a necessity, but I think it's sort of a general. Not many of them.
They are. They're only with Jewish people.
What about your friend? They have the daughter that's my age. She lives in California. There are 2 children. She works at the library. Maybe she volunteers at the library. It's a couple. They're from Massachusetts. They have 2 daughters. No.
That live here?
Yes, you had her call me. I think that's how they became friends.
I did?
Little girl.
Oh, but they're just here on vacation.
Yeah.
Shapiro.
Is
his family came from Randolph.
Okay.
His family came from Randolph. And they were the only Jews in Randolph.
What was their name?
Shapiro.
Oh, okay, right. You said that. I happened to meet a couple last weekend from Randolph. I thought they were the only Jews in Randolph.
Well, maybe
but
not.
they don't live there.
No.
They don't live there. They live in Framingham, Mass.
Yeah.
But he grew up in Randolph.
His father was a
cattleman.
Cattle, that's right.
Sold
cattle. Yeah.
Huh.
But they didn't have any Jewish people there. And he never experienced anti-Semitism at all. I don't think there's that much anti-Semitism in Vermont.
I wonder sometimes, even just in terms of racism in general, if you have to have more of a group to sort of create some hostility around it. If there's only one person.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a fact.
That's right.
It's like if a black person lives in a community, nobody really cares one way or the other.
Right.
I think you're right. I think a group of maybe people that other people don't like for some reason, right?
Yeah.
I think you're right.
I think there's actually some research to back that idea up, in particular with black people, that lots of communities that will be very tolerant of one or two families,
Right.
when the perception is that, well, boy, this is a larger phenomenon.
I
That's
agree.
When
Because Ron Anderson, I don't think he's ever experienced anything. He's black. And Gamal,
No.
never. Never. I think it's when there's a group.
yeah, and the Jews are not enough of a group in Vermont yet.
In Burlington they
yeah.
are. In Burlington they are. Stowe they are. Big Jewish population in Stowe. Much more so than here. A lot of people that came from
I
Montreal.
was just going to say there are a lot more people from Montreal.
That's what it is. And they have a group there too. A Jewish group that they formed. And they want to form a temple
In Stowe?
in Stowe.
Yeah. Well, it also happens that your one representative, your one Congress
Yeah.
guy,
Yeah.
from
Sanders.
Vermont is Jewish. Yeah.
And what about Governor Cunin?
Right?
And Dean's wife is Jewish.
That's right. My parents are very excited about Dean because my dad
Everybody
taught at
is.
the my dad taught at Albert Einstein
Uh-huh.
Medical School, and that's where Howard
That's
Dean
correct,
went. So
yeah.
they're especially excited about him.
I think a lot of New Yorkers
I
that I
got a
know
lot
are
of
excited.
questions when I was in New York last week about Dean.
The New Yorkers want him more than the Vermonters, I think.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
who would carry Vermont.